Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of What If Deku Had Green Lightning. If you guys enjoyed this what if and want to see part 3 of it, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Izuku and Katsuki were engaged in a heated game of checkers, Izuku winning. Despite him never needing one, he still had 30-odd backup strategies that were constantly shifting when their father walked in. He still wasn't used to the calm side of his biological son playing with his adopted son. It was eerie but nice, but once he regained his composure, he called out to the boys. "Hey kids, look what came for you today," he said whilst tossing them a letter each. The boys' eyes widened as they quickly rushed to their respective rooms to read the letter as fast as possible. The house echoed with Katsuki's excited "fuck yeah," and Izuku's equally ecstatic, a somewhat more restrained "yes." They immediately ran out of their rooms and looked each other dead in the eyes. "1A," they said in sync. Now was the part they were both waiting for. Katsuki went first. 110, he said. Izuku had a smirk growing on his face. 111, the green-haired boy replied. Katsuki was steaming but looked his brother dead in the eyes and simply said, "Damn nerd. Oh, get your cess down here for dinner." Their mother called them down. "You two have a couple days before school starts, and had better keep good until then," she continued, as the boys hurried down the stairs. They did not need to piss her off. That would definitely shatter their mood. It was the day. Their first day of high school. After their mother got a photo, she said it was for memories, but both her children knew it was for blackmail purposes. The two started on their way to school. It was a short walk and were both ecstatic. At least, that meant Izuku was motor-mouthing his curiosity regarding who would be in his class, what would be their quirks, etc. He had made sure to pack at least 2 notebooks and a couple pens, whereas for Bakugo this meant he was actually occasionally engaging with his brother's energetic tendencies. Izuku did make sure to reel himself in slightly, and by slightly it was closer to marginally, as to not overwhelm his new classmates. Eventually the pair managed to find their way through the giant school, and made it to a pair of giant double doors, with a large golden one adorning the top. They entered the room to be greeted by the blue-haired boy from the entrance exam. He immediately recognized them and made his way over. He fixed his glasses, unintentionally intimidating the green-haired boy, and began to make some interesting arm movements, as he began addressing the two. "Greetings. I'm Iida Taniya. I apologize for my actions on the day of the entrance exam. I severely misjudged your intentions and look forward to establishing a relationship." He finished with a sharp bow. Bakugo just glared at the boy and made his way to an empty desk, whereas Izuku did his best to calm the boy, and began to fanboy slightly. "I'm Izuku. Wait, you're an Iida. Are you related to Ingenium? What's your quirk? Do you have engines similar to his? Hey, has anyone ever had engines on the back of their head? That'd be annoying," he excitedly shot off, doing his best to restrain himself, albeit unsuccessful. It wasn't working. He heard his brother yell at him to, quote, "chill the fuck out." Izuku apologized before taking a seat near his brother, leaving Iida in a slight shock. After a little while, and a lot more greetings, Iida returned to his own seat, and began waiting for the teacher. There was still a couple more minutes, but he was unimpressed by their teacher regardless. This was UA, the top hero school in the country, and yet their teacher was absent. He sighed. He knew this was his best chance to become a hero, but there were surely better schools with better teachers than this. He straightened his back further and waited for the bell to ring. Izuku was slightly embarrassed by his lack of restraint, but didn't let it hamper him as he greeted the girl he had talked to at the exams. He hadn't seen her quirk in action and was really curious as to what it did, with lightning firing throughout his head as he powered his brain and senses. Suddenly, he heard a shuffling at the door as a zombie emerged from a sleeping bag. He jumped, attracting the attention of his classmates. He then proceeded to look at what had startled the green-haired boy. 4 seconds. Good enough. Right, put on the PE uniforms and come out to the field, he told them, rather monotonously. "But sir, wasn't there meant to be an introductory assembly today?" Iida called out. "We teachers are allowed to do what we like." "Welcome to UA," the teacher responded, with a grin that can only be described as shit-eating. "I'm Aizawa sensei, and you've got 5 minutes to get changed. If you are late you will be expelled." It took all of Izuku's self-control to not start fanning over the pro-hero, erase her head. He was well aware of the hero's irritable tendencies noticeable in both the limited information regarding the hero, and his few run-ins. Using some of his charge he sped himself up slightly to get out early. He was one of the first out and used his time to charge up a decent amount. He was by no means nearing capacity, but he still wanted to have enough energy to think, and hopefully keep going for the rest of the day. Eventually everyone made it out, and Aizawa sensei looked marginally less annoyed, maybe. It's hard to tell, and began explaining that they were going to have a quirk apprehension test, to see their potential. "Hey, this sounds like fun," a pink-skinned girl with horns called out. "Fun? Well then let's make this more interesting. Lowest score is assumed to have no potential, and thus will face expulsion, effective immediately. Aizawa-sensei said, a smirk growing on his face. Everyone promptly panicked. His smirk grew wider. Before the test began, Izuku and his brother looked at each other, each with a challenging glimmer in their eyes. They nodded, a silent challenge agreed upon. They would do their best, winner takes bragging rights. And boy would they use those bragging rights. Katsuki and Izuku were both prepared to do their best to best the other. Izuku knew that his brother had the upper hand in terms of immediate power, but he had the upper hand in stored power and having power over time. With the first event being a sprint, Izuku easily being faster than his brother, being able to channel energy straight to his legs, being able to get second overall, beaten by Iida. Katsuki was able to best his brother in both long jump and triple jump, by using powerful explosions to propel him further. He was first overall in both, his brother getting third after an ice user. Izuku beat him in grip strength, getting second only after someone who had an incredible amount of arms, and he and his brother tied for side jumps, Izuku using general lightning boosts and Katsuki using explosions, and were bested by a boy who continually bounced back and forth between two of his purple hair things. The final event was the ball toss, and both knew they couldn't beat Uraraka's infinity score, but could definitely do their best against each other. Katsuki propelled the ball 750 meters with a signature yell of die, and whilst Izuku was preparing to throw his with a combination of raw boosted strength and a plan to use an extended lightning strike, when he felt a lack of energy. He panicked and ran as far away as possible, despite the teacher's best attempts to restrain him. Then it happened. Aizawa was fairly happy with his class and was watching carefully when he noticed a certain green-haired boy. His name was Izuku, and it seemed that throughout the tests he was holding something back. He believed his quirk was green lightning, or something along those lines. He wasn't going to memorize the quirks and details of all 90-odd students he was teaching that year before the year even started. He also noticed an interesting connection between him and that Bakugo kid. They were brothers or something like that. He decided to ignore that for now. Coming to the ball toss, the final event, he saw the green-haired kid seem to be holding an excessive amount of energy, whilst using hardly any of it. He decided to confront the kid and activated his quirk. That was when he realized he made a huge mistake. Bakugo was watching his brother line up for the ball toss when he suddenly saw Aizawa-sensei's hair stand on end and his eyes go red. His brother seemed to notice this immediately and moved far away from their classmates when it happened. Bakugo realized what was happened and yelled a desperate warning to their teacher, who began to approach his brother, still with his quirk active. That's when it happened. Everyone around the school not only heard, but saw, and some even felt the surge of energy. Aizawa began to back off as he felt massive pulses of energy, and that's when he heard it. It was a crack of thunder, unlike those heard in thunderstorms. This was different. It was overwhelmingly loud, a noise that present Mick would be jealous of. He looked back at the green-haired boy who was surrounded completely by intense green lightning, firing off in every direction, so much that it was almost a solid beam of light. He jumped further away when he realized what happened. Erasing the boy's quirk meant that the boy's stored energy was to be all released immediately. The intensity of the energy released was immense, and as soon as it happened it ended. Aizawa was at a bit of a shock before hearing a boy call to him. A third year, Mirio Tagata. Hey, Aizawa-sensei. Mirio called out. Despite how casual he was, the amount of respect he had for the teacher was still clear. Would you like me to look after your class while you deal with that? Yeah, Aizawa responded, trying to compose himself. Yeah, that'd be great. He could hear Mirio begin to introduce himself to the class, as the other members of the Big Three also showed up. His class would be in good hands. Right now, he had to deal with whatever just happened. He tenderly picked up the boy, who was incredibly worse for wear. The green-haired boy was twitchy, covered in burns and unconscious. That wasn't too surprising considering the immense amount of energy that just came out. All as lightning, watch was fast, and being so fast it made it incredibly hot. He could still feel the warmth on the boy's skin as he carried them to Recovery Girl. Bakugo could smell burning flesh as their teacher ran past, his brother cradled in his arms. He wanted to go and find out what was going on when he felt tentacles grab him. Yo, what the fuck is this? I swear to God, whichever one of you fucking extras this is, I will blast you limb from limb, if you don't let go. He screamed, to no avail. Whoa, chill dude. They'll take care of that kid, no worries, Kirishima told him in an attempt to calm the explosive blonde. He's right, a cartoonish boy said. Anyway, I'm Mirio Tagata, and I'll be watching over you guys until Aizawa-sensei returns. Then who are those guys? Asked a girl with long black hair. Her name was Yairozu or something like that. We are part of the Big Three. The girl with long blue hair responded, I am Nejire Hato. And I am Tamaki Amajiki. A shy boy, the one with the tentacles for hands trailed off. Bakugo had stopped struggling long ago, but had also stopped listening as he zoned out, concerned for his brother. He knew that teacher's quirk had done something to erase his brother's quirk. Bakugo would never admit it, but he had actually paid attention to some of Izuku's ramblings, and it seemed as though all the energy Izuku had stored up beforehand was all released at once. With no quirk to control the excessive amounts of energy stored within him, it immediately released. Suddenly the girl with blue hair, who had up until now been bombarding various different classmates with questions, turned her gaze towards him. "Hey, I think I know you from somewhere," she said. Bakugo simply shrugged and tried to ignore her, but she still continued, "Hey, what's your quirk? What happened to the boy that just left? What was his quirk? Was it his quirk? I saw a brief flash of green. Did that have something to do with it?" Bakugo was prepared to respond. His brother's ramblings were somehow harder to keep up with than this girl's questioning, when Mirio cut her off. He continued talking about something, but he couldn't help but notice he wasn't the only one distracted. The hyperactive blue-haired girl was also lost in thought, which the shy boy also noticed, but didn't say anything about. It seemed Mirio also noticed this, with the occasional glance at her, but he kept his focus on the class until their teacher came back. What a first lesson. Izuku could feel warmth all over his body, as though he was just roasted over a spit, yet he couldn't actually feel anything. His nerves were probably fried after that. There would be no shortage of scars from this. He groaned as he turned over. He knows he should be feeling pain, but he also knew that was probably a result of the sudden outburst of lightning from him, as his nerves would be somewhat out of action for a little while. "Ah, good, you're finally awake. Don't try and move, just lie there and I'll make sure you get your work once you're feeling better." A voice spoke. He turned to see where it originated from. It seemed to have come from a short, elderly-looking lady with an oversized syringe as a cane. The recovery girl. Normally he would have started freaking out over her, but his energy was literally all gone, and didn't bother making a sound. This seemed to please the elderly nurse as she explained that she wouldn't be able to heal him until his energy was back, and as a result he needed to spend his time resting. Izuku mumbled something incoherent back, before drifting back into the sweet abyss of sleep. The class continued in an eerie silence. By the time Aizawa had returned he knew that there would be a slight glumness, but not to this extent. The big three were doing their best to keep the mood light. Well, Mirio was. Nejire was lost in thought and surprisingly quiet, whereas Tamaki was silent, as usual. Aizawa pinched his nose bridge. Maybe there was a connection between the problem children, but he couldn't be bothered to figure it out right now. Clearing his throat and making his presence known, he thanked the big three for their help, and told them that they could return to class. What he didn't expect was Bakugo to speak up. "Oi, can I go visit Izuku now?" Bakugo yelled in a typical abrasive voice, although there was a hint of concern and worry in amongst it. Aizawa sighed. "You can go visit your friend come lunch. Right now you need to focus on maths." Aizawa's response was met with a TSK and a grunt of compliance. At least he hoped it was compliance. He turned back to the board and started writing up some equations, a smirk growing on his face. Alright, he was excited for some trigonometry. Mirio and Tamaki did their best to contain the curiosity of their best friend, as she was eager to learn more about the boy who had just let out one of the most powerful blasts of energy any of them had heard, seen, and felt. It was a green strike, which seemed strikingly familiar to them in a way none of them could quite place. Nejire felt like she vaguely recognized the quirk, but didn't get a chance to get a good look at the boy, before he was carried away rather hurriedly by Aizawa's sensei. It was fair enough. His body was twitching and looked like it was covered in burns. Like, literally covered with burns. There was not a single spot on his body that was not charred, and she could feel the heat being emitted from the poor boy as the teacher ran past. Eventually she gave in, telling her friends that she wouldn't bother the boy. Probably. Maybe some other time. Definitely some other time. By the time lunch came around, Bakugo was itching to go check on his brother, and the moment the bell rang he had run out of the room, and headed straight to the nurse's office. He was very worried, more so when recovery girl told him that Izuku was still asleep, and probably wouldn't be awake until closer to the end of the day. He sighed, whispered some of his unique encouragement in his brother's ear, and returned back to the cafeteria. Eventually he found the rest of his classmates, who were sitting together at a table. He sat next to Kirishima and didn't really say much other than the occasional cuss when someone talked to him. By the time they had final class, which was English with present Mick, Bakugo was too nervous about his brother to really pay attention. Whenever he was asked a question he did answer, just with slightly more color than usual. Not too long before school was about to finish, the classroom door opened, attracting everyone's attention. There stood Izuku, exhausted and nervous as ever for disturbing the class. He quietly took his seat and started writing his notes, although slightly less than normal, still excessively more than anyone else though. Eventually, at the end of the class, President Mick gave the students some time to socialize, and most attention was directed towards Izuku, the poor anxious green-haired boy. He was way too tired for this, and his brother knew that, but his brother was also so loving that he wanted to see Izuku suffer. Sure, he would pay for it later, but right now he just wanted to see this play out. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Izuku trailed off. I guess first you need to understand my quirk. Basically, I can charge and store green lightning, which can be used for enhancement or as a long-ranged attack, not really sure what the limits are yet. So is it like my electrification? Kaminari asked, curious if he had a fellow electricity user. In a way, but it is far more versatile, Izuku continued. The issue is that I can't generate it quickly, hence I need to charge it up. But the main problem that happened was when Aizawa-sensei erased my quirk. My body had all the energy stored up, but without the quirk it had no way to control it. So that means, it expelled itself as fast as possible from your body. Yorozu asked, a thoughtful expression on her face. Yeah, pretty much. Izuku finished, his nervousness returning. Are you okay now? Uraraka asked him, concerned for her first friend at the new school. Yeah, I just ended up with burns and some temporary nerve damage, and nothing too bad, he replied nervously, desperate for the attention to end. Luckily for him, it did, and Bakugo watched as his brother returned to his seat, focusing on the notes from the lesson. By the end of the day, Izuku was still on his feet, only barely though. Any more interaction and he would probably just collapse into a puddle. Unfortunately for him, that's what was going to happen. The third years he recognized as those from in front of the gate came up to him, but before he could get a word out, he just fell asleep. Luckily, his brother was there to catch him. They told him that Izuku was exhausted after what happened earlier and would be alright later. Bakugo heaved his brother onto his back and started on their way home. The third-year boys understood and started heading away to meet up with their other friend and make sure she didn't bother the exhausted green-haired boy who was being carried away. Izuku was groggy as ever in the mornings. He was still drained from the happenings of yesterday, but was preparing to go to school regardless. Dragging himself out of bed, he made his way downstairs, where his mother had made breakfast. She would occasionally offer Izuku coffee or black tea, as she knew that this would help the boy wake up, use his quirk better, and most of all his energy wouldn't be her problem. But Bakugo always declined for him. No one wanted to deal with a caffeinated Izuku. While eating and charging his quirk, Bakugo was talking with their mother. The talking soon became yelling. The yelling soon became screaming. Quietly slipping back to his room to get changed and grab his stuff, he waved a quick goodbye before heading out the door. He would be quite early, but there wasn't really anything better for him to do. Once he arrived at school, earlier than the ever-punctual Iida, he took his seat and pulled out a notebook. This one was dedicated to his own quirk and techniques. He took note of what happened when Eraser had erased his quirk, causing his body to lose control over the energy inside of him. Whilst he was only on around 40% charge, his body ended up scarred from burns, with his nervous system effectively shutting down temporarily from overload. But there was, from what Bakugo told him, a massive noise, an insane flash of light and a burst of energy. Perhaps if he could train his body, he could weaponize this, a small burst intermittently, or large burst as a kamikaze-style attack, if the situation called for it. Kamikaze. Isn't that literally a suicidal attack? A voice sounded behind him, breaking him out of his mumbling. Ah. Uraraka. Good morning. Izuku said, doing his best to change the conversation's tone. He really didn't want to talk about something so somber at this time of morning. Out of the corner of his eye he also saw Bakugo arrive with slightly more ruffled hair than usual. Hi Izuku. What do you think we'll be doing today? Uraraka, thankfully, responded with something different, and as he opened his mouth to reply, everyone heard a signature voice paired with a unique smile. I am here. Coming through the door like a normal teacher. All Might came through the door, seconds before the bell rang, decidedly not like a normal teacher, but no one really cared. It was All Might. And he was going to teach them. Greetings students of Class 1A, he started. I will be teaching you foundational heroics. Before saying more, he pressed a button, and out of the wall came 20 suitcases, each one with a name on it. Izuku has his costume gamma, but instead of arm braces, fingerless gloves in the same style as his boots. Find your costume, and go get changed. Meet me in ground beta in 5 minutes. All Might finished, before running through the door in the direction of one of the urban environments. Everyone looked at each other in shock, before grabbing their respective costumes and running to the change rooms. Izuku, once again, was one of the earlier finishers and came out to the environment and dedicated himself to charging before All Might explained the task to them. It would be a heroes versus villains practice, inside one of the taller buildings. Pairings were made, and Izuku was paired with Uraraka against Kaminari and Jiro. On the other hand, his brother was paired with Yorozu, the irony of the creation user with the destructive loving explosion user not lost on him, and against Mineta and Iida. He wasn't sure of the other pairings, he wasn't really paying attention to that. Izuku and Uraraka would be the villains, and their fight would be second, with his brother and Yorozu going up first. Izuku and Uraraka sat watching the screens, whilst also creating a plan. Bakugo prepared himself to go up against Sonic and Diaper Boy, being the hero team mean that he would need to come up with a strategy on the fly. Waiting around with the 3D printer was, to say the least, boring but not infuriating at least. So, do you have a plan? She asked him. Go and blow some shit up. Bakugo responded, quite bluntly. First, language. Second, it might be beneficial to have a more concise plan. Yorozu responded. Well, first, no fuck off. Second, you got one then. Well, if we go with your incredibly broad idea, I can make something to target or shape the explosives if you can fill them. Sounds fucking great, let's do it. Bakugo replied, a smirk growing across his face. Basically, they would be using something like his gauntlets, but it would be specifically targeted, and both would be able to utilize it. They spent the remainder of the villain's preparation time preparing their own plan. After the 5 minutes were up, they entered through the main door, nodding at each other and began moving up the stairs. They had a feeling Mineta would have laid traps along the floors and doorways, but were mildly surprised when there was only one doorway with it. They both knew that they were planning on hauling themselves up, so going the next level up, they placed some of the explosives on the ground and prepared themselves, ready to drop. Just before Bakugo set them off, Yorozu tapped him on the shoulder to hand pass him a pair of earmuffs. He took them and scoffed, mostly because he didn't know how else to respond, and put them on before detonating the charges. Dropping through the ceiling, Bakugo and Yorozu had only a few moments before they hit the ground to find a shocked Iida and Mineta. Acting quickly, Bakugo tied up Mineta whilst Yorozu tied up Iida. They heard All Might announce that the activity was over before releasing their opponents. Good job, Yorozu said to him as they walked out of the building. Yeah, you too. Bakugo replied, with a smile. Wait, you just smiled. Yeah, and don't you fucking dare say a word to a soul, or they'll never find your fucking body. Oh? Okay then. After the first group returned, Izuku went up and congratulated his brother as All Might, and the class went through the rights and wrongs. Whilst the heroes shouldn't have gone with such a destructive tactic, it was successful in subduing and confusing the villains for long enough. Soon after, it was time for Izuku's team to go, and as they were heading out, they saw 3 people enter the observation room where All Might and the class were. He briefly registered that he saw them, but was immediately lost in thought as he and Uraraka set about establishing their plan. Once they reached the top of the staircase, they both placed their hands on it and waited for the time to start. Back in the observation room, most people, including the big 3, were confused by what was going on. Bakugo knew what his brother had in mind. Having had played so many different games with him, Bakugo knew there was a plan, along with at least a dozen backup plans. Once the time started, everyone assumed Jiro and Kaminari would win, especially since they had the information advantage. At least that's what they thought. Suddenly, Izuku's arms started arcing with green lightning, and his hair stood on end, as they all saw Jiro jump back in pain, after sticking one of her earbuds in the wall. Bakugo smirked, and everyone looked towards him, their eyes demanding an explanation. You guys haven't known Izuku as long as I have, but what I can tell you is that if he is given time to plan, he will damn well use it, he explained, their eyes all glued to the screen as they wanted to see what happens next. Everyone saw the brief flash of green through the building, explaining the pain Jiro experienced. That's when the next stage of Izuku's plan kicked in. Bakugo, the big 3, and the class watched as green lightning filled the stairs. Then it broke into hundreds of pieces, with Uraraka's quirk causing the pieces to float. This stopped the hero team from advancing further, leaving them stumped for the remaining time. Principal Nezu walked in, calling the big 3 away for a meeting, just before Izuku and Uraraka walked back in with the hero team. The hero team had their heads hung low as they walked back into the room, and they went through the rights and wrongs. The villain team acted well with the knowledge of their opponent's quirks, and quickly cut off any possible access routes, whilst the hero team should have tried something else, or given up earlier and gotten backup, the common thing for all heroes, All Might reassured them. Bakugo and Izuku sat in content silence, well, ignoring the frantic scribbling of Izuku's pencil in his notebook. Eventually lunch came and went, the class remained together as they had more battles to go through, and come the end of the day everyone was exhausted. Izuku and his brother went home, started another game of chess, before going to bed and calling it a day. Several days of school later, Class 1 arrived to see Aizawa-sensei standing at the front of the gates with a bus. He explained they would be going to a separate part of UA, known as the Unforeseen Simulation Joint. It was a specialized area to help students with skills related to search and rescue. Everyone was excited for having a field trip so early on in the term, let alone in the year, and much to Iida's dismay, the class piled onto the bus in their usual disorderly fashion. Eventually Izuku found himself sitting with Bakugo, and for some reason Asui, who sat nearby, turned the conversation to Bakugo's less than amiable personality. Bakugo, Asui started, "What's wrong with your personality? What the fuck did you just say about me?" Bakugo replied, meeting bluntness with bluntness. "I mean, she has a point, dude," Kirishima broke in, his hard-headedness showing in another of many ways. At least he had the defensive capabilities to deal with it. "Yo, watch what the fuck you're saying about me, shitty hair. I have a fucking fantastic personality," Bakugo retorted, somewhat proving his classmate's point. "Man, you're just backing our point up," Kaminari jumped in as well. For some reason being idiotic without his quirk short-circuiting his brain. "You wanted IU electric bast." Bakugo broke off with a start as the bus stopped, saving his classmates from hell. For now, anyway. Everyone stepped out to look over the massive dome that was the USJ before stepping through the doors to be greeted by 13. Greetings, students of 1A. I am 13, and I will be teaching you search and rescue operations. They began, Izuku managing to keep his motor mouth closed. Probably cause Aizawa-sensei was standing right next to him. Today we will be focusing on. They began to trail off, noticing Aizawa-sensei's hair standing on end. Everyone looked at the red-eyed teacher, who began preparing to fight. Their attention quickly turned to the target of their teacher's terrifying gaze, to see a purple mist with some, less than friendly-looking people coming out of it. Hey, fake villains, neat. Kaminari said, still not having had used his quirk yet apparently. He was quickly met with a hard whack from Jiro, and Aizawa-sensei clarifying that those were real villains. 13. Protect the kids, I'll hold them off, he said before jumping down the stairs, and immediately knocking one of the many villains out. Izuku was looking, doing his best to calm his nerves, before hearing 13 call out to Iida to run for teachers. The Miss guy showed up, saying I'm sorry, I can't let you do that. Kazuki and Kirishima thought the best idea would be to try and rush the metal frame of the villain. Before they reached him, a purple mist appeared in their way, and they flew straight through it before it closed behind them again. I have my orders to torture and kill you, so not resisting will make this marginally less painful, the mist said, before engulfing all students in a mist, sending them to different locations. Looking down, he saw the water moments before crashing straight into it. After his eyes took a moment to readjust, he saw a shark villain coming towards him. Izuku carefully made sure the lightning wasn't arsing around him, and powered up his legs in an attempt to get out of the water, when he saw the shark get kicked and a tongue wrap around him. Ignoring the weirdness of the situation, it was a world where almost everyone had a superpower, so that wasn't really too hard. He was launched flawlessly out of the water, and gently placed on the boat, as Asui landed next to him. Asui? Izuku started before being cut off. Call me Tsu. The frog girl cut him off. Right, Tsu, thanks for the save back there. It's no problem. I saved the diaper boy as well unfortunately, she muttered the last part, before gesturing to the purple-haired kid slumped over in a corner next to her. He still has the audacity to try stuff. Let's just ignore him for now. To be fair, everyone wanted to do that permanently, not just Izuku. We're trapped on this boat, surrounded by water villains and need to get back to the middle. Do you have any ideas, Izuku? Well, I don't think they know your quirk, otherwise I highly doubt you would be sent to what is effectively your element, so we have that on our side at least. Yes, that is true. How does your quirk react with water? Good question. Shall we let the villains be the first to find out? Sounds fair to me. I'm not carrying the grey piece though. Grey piece? Grey piece? She responded with a smirk. Izuku sighed and relented, taking the grey piece under one of his arms, as they prepared to electrocute the water. Summoning about a small bout of his charge, he could feel his hair stand on end, and the lightning arc off of him, as he carefully directed the charge, first through the ship and then into the water. Once he felt it reach water, he gathered the remaining charge and opened his eyes, which now shone a brilliant emerald green. Discharge, intensity 2, he uttered, a relatively weak move that would be powerful enough to incapacitate the villains in the water long enough for them to make it away. The arsing round him subsided as his move wore off, and his eyes returned to a darker green, and his hair became floppy. He nodded to Tsu, who lifted Izuku, who was holding Greypiest, with her tongue and jumped back towards the center, to be greeted by a terrifying sight. In front of them, a large creature with a beak of a mouth and parts of its brain sticking out, pinned Aizawa-sensei down, who was looking worse for wear. Whilst neither the creature nor the other villains had noticed the students yet, they wouldn't be able to do anything from their paralyzing fear. Bakugo and Kirishima found themselves in an abandoned building, surrounded by various low-level villains. Kirishima was about to start saying something, when Bakugo's hand started crackling with explosions. Less talking, more exploding the villains. Bakugo stated, somewhat excited to not need to hold back so much. Kirishima sighed, hardening his hands, and turned his back to the explosive boy, prepared to take the other side. Let's get going then. Izuku's gaze was focused on Aizawa-sensei's right arm, which had visible muscle fibers, and was bent at a highly unnatural angle. He began collecting some of his lightning, preparing to shock the bird creature, when he heard the mist begin talking. Tomura, I let one of the students escape. I apologize for my incompetence. Kurogiri, if your quirk wasn't so important I would have dusted that metal frame of yours by now. The other villain, Tomura, responded. Covered in dismembered hands, was a unique look, but he was definitely a villain regardless. The teachers will be showing up soon, and then it's game over. We won't even fight the boss. Guess we'll just have to kill off some of the minions. Tomura finished off, a scary glint in his eyes as he turned towards Tsu. In a flash of inhuman speed, Tomura was in front of the trio from the flood zone, with his hand shooting towards Tsu's face. Thinking quickly, Izuku moved his charge from his legs to his hands, and caught the villain's wrist before it could get closer, sending the charge through his hand and into the villain's wrist, causing a screech of pain to come from them. Izuku watched as Tomura flinched, pulling his hand away from Tsu. Izuku, running on adrenaline, moved his charge back to his legs and kicked the villain in their stomach, once more releasing some charge into the villain's body. Tomoura was propelled further away and hunched over in pain, twitching slightly as a result of the lightning attacks. Noticing the condition Tomoura was in, he decided that he was sufficiently incapacitated and focused back onto Aizawa-sensei's position, where he was still trapped underneath the bird monster thing. He probably couldn't safely electrocute the creature in particular without also affecting Aizawa-sensei, but he wasn't sure what else to do. His mind was being powered by his quirk as he watched Aizawa-sensei try to escape, only to have his head beaten into the ground. Izuku knew he personally didn't have the skill or experience to be able to successfully fight off any villains stronger than the cannon fodder, but Aizawa-sensei definitely would. All my knowledge and even with my quirk helping my brain, I can't assist Aizawa-sensei. Wait, Izuku suddenly realized how he could help Aizawa-sensei without risking them in the process, or at least, there was less chance of injury as a result. Returning his charge back to his feet, he carefully established a connection between Aizawa-sensei and himself. Feeling the power flowing from himself to Aizawa-sensei, he quickly became aware that he wouldn't be able to do much else whilst this was happening, and wouldn't be able to do much else afterwards. Great Beast, I need you two to hold off the villains, so I can help Aizawa-sensei. Izuku told them. Great Beast screamed something incoherent at him about avoiding getting involved, but Tsu nodded and took up a fighting stance. He carefully guided the charge through the floor, towards Aizawa-sensei, and let it fill Aizawa-sensei's body. Carefully he focused on moving charge to the muscles and tendons, hopefully giving Aizawa-sensei the energy, strength and speed he needed to take out the remaining villains. Aizawa was in tremendous amounts of pain, his head was throbbing, and his right arm felt like it had shattered into about 1,000,000 different pieces. Probably because it was. Ignoring the cynical part of his mind, which was somehow still functional despite his definitely severe concussion, he focused on how to get out of the creature's grasp. His head was being held by one of the creature's arms, and his right arm was being held behind his back with one of the creature's knees holding him down, the other providing it balance. It only has one source of balance, and it's prone to being tipped due to the way I'm being held down. If I could force myself up, I could probably tip it off balance for long enough to get a little bit away. Aizawa, however, knew that plans and ideas are nothing when you don't have the physical strength to go through with it. He sighed and focused on the situation of his students, watching the problem child incapacitate the hand guy, Tomoura apparently, and willed the problem child to not interfere with his own situation. His thoughts were filled with panic as he saw the problem child talking to Asui and Mineta, one of whom took up a fighting stance and the other started panicking, and watched as the problem child's eyes started lighting up and his hair stand on end, a clear sign his quirk was activating. He was about to yell at them as he saw their legs start having lightning arc off, but was relieved when the problem child remained in one position, although incredibly confused. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw familiar green lightning arc off his own body, as Aizawa looked at the problem child, who responded with a nod. Suddenly, he felt energy course through his body as he himself felt like his adrenaline just kicked in tenfold. He tried to move to push off the monstrosity, to find his own limbs all arsing with the green lightning. He pushed the monstrosity off of himself, to find it remarkably easy. He followed it with a quick kick to the monster's stomach, which fell faster and stronger than ever before. Looking back to the problem child, his eyes had closed but the lightning and hair still reacting as earlier, he understood what had happened. The problem child had used their quirk to enhance Aizawa, much like the way he had enhanced himself. Aizawa's signature grin returned to his face as he took up a fighting stance, facing the beast in front of him. Moving fast, he went for a heel kick, expecting it to be blocked by the creature's speed and strength. Surprisingly, he was marginally faster than the creature, as still slightly weaker. Using the creature as a springboard, he jumped back and returned to the fighting stance. He didn't know how long the kid could power him, and so had to beat this creature ASAP. Running in again, he went for a left hook to the creature's ribs, which hit, but still made no effect on the creature. Haha. Aizawa heard Tomoura laughing, who was still curled over and slightly twitchy. That creature's designed to beat, no, slaughter All Might. It has shock absorption and hyper-regeneration, not to mention its inhuman strength and speed. Shock absorption, probably means it has a limit, but I can't rely on this for too long. No idea how long the kid can power me for. I just have to keep its attention until the other teachers arrive. Aizawa thought, doing his best to keep the creature's attention. His combat style primarily involved countering his opponent, so with the speed to outpace the creature, this was a task easily completed. After what felt like hours, in reality it was about a minute, of fast-paced dodges and blocks, Aizawa could feel the power slightly reducing as his speed dropped slightly, and the blocks became less effective. Focusing more on his speed to keep out of the creature's range, he hoped the kid could hold on just long enough for the teachers to arrive. Izuku watched as Aizawa-sensei's movements became a blur, his enhancement combining with Aizawa-sensei's strength and speed, along with his experience and skill, making short work of avoiding the black creature. Normally he would be able to keep up, but he didn't want to waste his mental capacity or energy on powering his eyes to watch what was happening. His feet were losing feeling as the sensation of pins and needles began to travel to his knees. Leaning on Grapeast, as his classmate was still in an absent-minded state of panic, and Sue was helping support him after whacking the last of the villains with her tongue. Izuku could feel his reserves draining fast, as sending enough lightning to sufficiently enhance his teacher over such a distance was exhausting. At least he didn't have to go through the air. There were a few seeing spots, his vision getting fuzzy as his stamina was running out quickly from the effort, and trying to keep his stores from running out. He wanted sleep. So much. Realizing the complete numbness in his feet, he knew there was only so much longer he could go on. Next stage would be minor nerve damage, not just shutdown. It was repairable, but he would get an earful from Recovery Girl, who was not happy about his slightly workaholic, after insisting on going back to class after he had been healed. The teachers needed to come. ASAP. All Might was furious. He had run into Iida, who was running to get the other teachers, whilst on his way to the USJ. After taking a quick break, he probably should have dealt with the bank robbery faster, but the reporters insisted on an interview, albeit brief. Iida very quickly explained the situation, before running towards the school once more. All Might's signature smile was barely there. Preparing himself, he leaped in the direction of the USJ, intent on smashing through the roof. Crashing through one of the glass roof panels of the USJ, All Might landed with a crater, and quickly took in the situation. A handful of students were hanging around at the top of the stairs, several were emerging bruised from various zones, and a couple, not counting Iida or Higakure, were nowhere to be seen. He also saw his colleague 13 looking worse for wear. Most perplexing was Aizawa, being chased by a large bird thing, both of whom were moving at blistering speeds, although Aizawa with green lightning coming off of him. If it weren't for All Might's own capabilities, he would barely be able to register what was happening. All Might, take over for me. Aizawa's yell broke All Might out of his thoughts. This thing has hyperregeneration and shock absorption. There were a few weak points at its head, neck and upper left torso. Right? Everything will be fine now. All Might started yelling, rushing over to his colleague's side. Why? Because. He continued, winding back a starting punch. If it was absorption there would be a limit, and whatever was going on with Aizawa would have started wearing it down. I am here. All Might boomed as his first punch hit the creature. The creature was flung into the wall, and All Might heard one of the villains calling out. All Might, they started. Good of you to show up. Meet Nomu. They've been created specifically to kill you in your prime, despite Eraserhead having had already done a number on them. Have fun. They broke off with a creepy smile, the tips of which visible along the edges of the disembodied hand. All Might's smile never faltered as he wound up another punch, and charged at the creature. Whilst All Might was trading blows with the creature, Aizawa jumped towards the top of the stairs, gesturing to the students not yet there to come to him. He felt the energy that he had become accustomed to suddenly leave his body, as the green lightning that once crackled around him subsided. Turning his head towards Izuku, the problem child who was the source of the power, he felt a little sick. The boy, whilst completely fine on the outside, was carried to him by Asi, as the frog girl gently laid Izuku on the ground near him, at the top of the stairs. However, it was clear that was not how the boy felt. Izuku was drained. His head pounding from a migraine, he had been concentrating incredibly hard to carefully manage the lightning, and his legs failing him the moment he stopped using his quirk on Aizawa-sensei. He vaguely recognized Sue picking him up, and carrying him over to the stairs, with the Grapeast not too far behind. He wanted to sleep, but his head felt like it would split apart, and his legs wouldn't carry him, if he forced himself to stand. He vaguely recognized Aizawa-sensei's voice as his teacher was giving directions to students. Uraraka made Izuku weightless, and Shoji gently pulled the boy onto his back. All Might saw from the corner of his eye as the students were gathering together and helping their classmate. It made him smile, which he wasn't afraid to show as he continued to pepper the Nomu creature with powerful punches. Whilst his colleague had been able to outpace the Nomu, All Might was unable to, only barely keeping up. However, what All Might had that Aizawa did not was decisive strength. Winding up another powerful punch, he could see the shock absorption on the creature had already reached its limits. Aiming at one of the weak points Aizawa mentioned, he launched his fist straight into the Nomu's upper torso. The creature was heavily impacted by the blow, and he watched as it briefly stopped. Oh, one of the villains started, the one with hands all over it. It would appear that the shock absorption has already reached its limit. No matter, it can still destroy you despite that. Aizawa must have done a lot if the shock absorption was meant to outlast me, yet it has hardly lasted a dozen punches. All Might thought. His thoughts were interrupted by the villain getting a powerful blow straight into his left rib, resulting in All Might coughing up a little blood. Ah, it seems Master was right, the handman started. You have been getting weaker. We'll make it easier on you and finish you off quicker to save the remnants of your pitiful hero pride. All the meanwhile All Might was blocking and dodging the Nomu's barrage of attacks. Winding his fist back, he prepared a powerful punch. He was not quite at his limit, but he sure was getting close. Have you ever heard this saying before, villain? All Might boomed as he prepared to finish off the Noma creature, go beyond. Plus ultra. He finished off as the devastating blow hit the same weak spot from earlier. The creature seemed to pause in time, before being propelled through the air towards the glass dome that encased the USJ. All Might stood victorious, glaring at the villains who stood before him. The symbol of peace spoke a few words, surrender, or be defeated. Tomyure, we should go, the purple mist spoke, opening up what appeared to be a warp gate. Kurogiri, we came so close to beating the final boss, Tomyure began, but we have gained experience, and we know what to bring next time. Next time we see you, All Might, we will end the so-called symbol of peace. The two remaining villains walked through the warp, leaving All Might to return to the stairs, as the remaining teachers showed up to help clean up the mess. Bakugo and Kirishima had finally worked their way out of the building. They quickly went back to the center to be met by an interesting scene. All Might had just punched a bird creature through one of the panels of the USJ, and the hand villain and Miss Sky just walked through one of the Miss Sky's portals. They quickly ran past All Might, and up the stairs to find Izuku being carried by Shoji, Aizawa-sensei looking ever so slightly less pissed off than usual, and the other teachers doing their best to help the other students. The spiky-haired blonde and spiky redhead looked at each other, with only one question: what the fuck just happened? Swearing courtesy of Bakugo. Izuku has a migraine from quirk overuse. Aizawa-sensei was holding off that monster thing until All Might showed up, and everyone was scattered to various locations. Yorozu answered, you guys are the last to arrive. Wait, so Aizawa-sensei was holding off that monster thing that All Might was struggling with? Kirishima asked. Yes, we can discuss that some other time. First, let's go back to the main campus, and make sure Recovery Girl looks over you all, Principal Nezu interjected, motioning towards the door as the other teachers assisted the injured. Bakugo, Kirishima and a few other students were left uninjured, but Bakugo was really worried for Izuku. Izuku looked like he was about to start screaming any moment, his eyes squinted and hands over his ears. Hey Yorozu, Bakugo started, startling the black-haired girl, can you make some industrial-grade earmuffs in the blindfold? Sure, but why? Yorozu responded, surprised by the gentleness of Bakugo's tone. The boy, in response, gestured to Izuku. Yorozu handed him the items, and Bakugo reached over to Izuku, in order to place the requested items on the green-haired boy. Bakugo heard an audible sigh of relief and a whisper of thank you, and he turned back to Yorozu with a proper explanation. His migraine from the quick overuse is never minor, because if he forces himself past the point of just tiredness, he's probably going to go all the way. Yeah, that makes sense, but since when could you be so gentle and kind? She replied, genuine curiosity in her eyes. Why is it such a fucking surprise to people? Bakugo whisper yelled back. Yorozu's response was a shrug. She opened her mouth to speak, to be interrupted by Aizawa-sensei announcing their return to the main campus of UA. Bakugo watched as his brother was carried off by Shoji in the direction of the nurse's office. He wanted to follow, but was told by Aizawa-sensei to return to class for the last hour of the day. The man had already seen Recovery Girl for his own injuries, and was stubbornly refusing to take the remainder of the day off. Bakugo opened his mouth to speak, but Kirishima placed a hand on his classmate's shoulder. The blonde boy sighed, restless to check on his brother, and shouldered the hand off before someone else's hand was on his other shoulder. Izuku needs quiet and rest, right? Yorozu started, there probably isn't much more you can do, and being with him won't solve anything. Yeah, alright then, Bakugo relented, you can let go of me now. Yorozu complied, and Bakugo started making his way towards class. Aizawa-sensei sighed as he watched the class file in. Other than Izuku, all of the students were in a state of mind where they could process what was happening. Kaminari had recovered since his use. Izuku was suffering from extreme migraines and a nervous system overload in his lower body. It was only temporary, but Recovery Girl said that if it were to happen to a similar extent too many times there would be lasting effects. Once every seat was filled, he took a breath, and asked the class if they had any questions. Immediately a dozen hands shot up. He sighed again, pointing at Higakure's glove, and started answering their questions. By the end of the impromptu questionnaire, the class had learned several things. First, quirks can be incredibly versatile if you're creative enough. Second, UA can be dangerous. Third, Aizawa-sensei was a goddamn badass. He might be lacking in raw strength from a quirk, but he had skills that made him a force to be reckoned with. Aizawa sighed as he dismissed the class for the week, as it was Friday. There was an emergency meeting with the teachers as soon as school was finished, and he headed to the staff room for whatever Nezu wanted. Aizawa just wanted sleep. The moment class was done for the day, Bakugo ran straight out the day, and towards the nurse's office. He made it to the entrance, before being blocked by Recovery Girl. I know you are concerned for your friend, but... Recovery Girl started. He's my brother, now let me through, so I can take him home. Bakugo cut her off, barely holding back his tongue. He'll be staying overnight, Recovery Girl told the fiery blonde sympathetically, and he'll be back at your place tomorrow, probably around 10 in the morning, after I give him something to eat, and run over a couple final tests. Right now he just needs peace and quiet, and I've gotten cementus to cover the windows in one of the rooms, so he'll be alright there. For now, just head on home, I think you have some friends waiting for you. She finished, pointing in the direction of the gates. Bakugo gave the nurse a glare, as though he were about to argue, but knew it would be pointless. He nodded to her, before turning to the gates to walk home. Their mother is going to be annoyed, if undeniably proud. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.